In 1415, England should not have won. The English army was exhausted, hungry, outnumbered, far from home, and trapped deep inside enemy territory. Yet, within a single day, one of the most shocking military victories in history would unfold. The Battle of Agincourt would become a nightmare for France and a legend for England. The story began with King Henry V, young, ambitious, and determined to revive England's claims to the French throne. For decades, England and France had been locked in what would later become known as the Hundred Years' War. Both kingdoms claimed power, both wanted dominance, and neither side was willing to back down. In 1415, Henry crossed the English Channel with thousands of soldiers. His goal was simple: invade France, demonstrate English strength, and force the French nobility to take him seriously. The campaign began well. The English captured the port city of Harfleur after a long siege, but victory came at a terrible cost. Disease spread through the army. Dysentery weakened thousands. Supplies dwindled. Many soldiers died before ever reaching a battlefield. By the time Henry began marching north toward English controlled territory, his army was a shadow of its former self. The French saw an opportunity across the kingdom. Noblemen gathered their forces. Knights arrived from every direction. The French believed they had finally cornered the English king. Their confidence was overwhelming. Why wouldn't it be? The French army was significantly larger. Many of its soldiers were heavily armored knights, considered the elite warriors of medieval Europe. The English looked doomed as the two armies approached each other near the village of Agincourt. The situation became even worse for England. Heavy rain turned the battlefield into thick mud. Fields became swamps. Movement slowed dramatically. The French commanders still expected victory. Numbers alone seemed enough. Many French nobles even argued over who would receive the honor of capturing Henry V. Some believed the battle was already won before it had even started. That confidence would soon become a disaster. On the morning of the 25th of October 1415, the armies faced each other. Thousands of French knights stood ready. Colorful banners filled the horizon. The English line appeared small by comparison, but Henry possessed one weapon that would change everything: the longbow. For generations, English archers had mastered this deadly weapon. A skilled longbowman could launch arrows at astonishing speed. Entire clouds of arrows could descend upon an enemy force within seconds. As the French advanced, the English archers began firing. The sky darkened. Arrows slammed into armor. Horses panicked. Formations broke apart. And then the mud became the French army's greatest enemy. Heavy armor that normally offered protection now became a burden. Knights struggled to move. Men slipped. Soldiers crashed into each other. The battlefield transformed into chaos. The French advance slowed, then stopped, then collapsed. What should have been a glorious charge became a deadly traffic jam of steel, mud, and panic. The English kept firing, again and again and again. The French army continued pushing forward, but every step became more difficult than the last. Within hours, one of the largest and most powerful armies in Europe was trapped in a nightmare of its own making. And the worst was still coming. The day France lost its nobles. As the French army struggled through the mud at Agincourt, disaster unfolded with terrifying speed. The battlefield became a killing ground. Knights who had spent their entire lives preparing for war suddenly found themselves unable to move. Some slipped beneath the weight of their own armor. Others were crushed by soldiers behind them. Many never even reached the English line. Those who did faced a different problem. The English were ready. Archers abandoned their bows and joined the fighting, using axes, knives, hammers, and whatever weapons they could find. They attacked exhausted French soldiers trapped in the mud. The battle became brutal, personal, chaotic. French nobles who expected glory instead found themselves fighting for survival. The English line held, the French line shattered. Wave after wave of attackers failed. Every new assault only added more bodies to the field. Soon, the dead and wounded created obstacles for the living. The battlefield itself became a weapon, and it was working against France. One of the most shocking aspects of Agincourt was who died. This was not merely a military defeat, it was a catastrophe for the French nobility. Some of the most powerful aristocrats in France were killed. Princes, counts, dukes, military commanders, entire noble families lost heirs in a single day. The scale of the loss stunned Europe. The French army had entered the battle, believing victory was inevitable. Instead, much of its leadership lay dead on the field. For England, the result was extraordinary. Henry V survived, his army survived, and against all odds, England had defeated a much larger force. The victory transformed Henry into a legend across Europe. Rulers struggled to understand what had happened. How could a smaller army defeat such overwhelming numbers? The answer was a combination of leadership, discipline, terrain, weather, and technology. The French underestimated their enemy. The English understood the battlefield, and Agincourt became one of history's greatest examples of how arrogance can destroy an army. The consequences extended far beyond the battlefield. The French monarchy was weakened. Political instability grew. English influence expanded. Years later, Henry V would force France into signing the Treaty of Troyes. The agreement recognized him as heir to the French throne. For a moment, it appeared England might actually rule both kingdoms. The dream of a dual monarchy seemed within reach. But history had other plans. A young peasant girl named Joan of Arc would eventually appear and help reverse France's fortunes. Yet, even she could never erase the memory of Agincourt. More than 6 centuries later, the battle remains one of the most famous military disasters in French history, and one of the greatest victories England ever achieved. A battle where confidence became weakness, mud became a weapon, and a vastly outnumbered army changed the course of European history forever. Yet perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Agincourt was not the battle itself, it was the lesson it left behind. For centuries, medieval warfare had been dominated by the knight. The armored nobleman was considered the ultimate weapon of war. He represented wealth, status, power, and military superiority. Across Europe, kings relied on mounted knights to win battles. Noble families spent fortunes training their sons for war. Entire social systems were built around the belief that heavily armored cavalry was nearly unstoppable. Agincourt shattered that illusion on a muddy field in northern France. Some of Europe's most prestigious warriors discovered that armor alone could not guarantee victory. Numbers alone could not guarantee victory. Status alone could not guarantee victory. Discipline, preparation, terrain, and leadership mattered just as much, perhaps even more. The French army possessed more knights, more nobles, more prestige, more confidence. Yet, confidence became one of its greatest weaknesses. Many French commanders underestimated Henry V. Some believed the English army was already defeated before the battle began. Others argued over future rewards instead of focusing on the dangers ahead. That arrogance would cost them dearly. Meanwhile, Henry V understood exactly how desperate his situation was. His army was exhausted. His men were sick. His resources were limited. Because he understood the danger, he prepared carefully. He chose his ground wisely. He trusted his archers, and he refused to panic when facing overwhelming odds. The result became one of history's most studied military victories. Even modern military academies continue examining Agincourt today, not because it was the largest battle, not because it was the bloodiest, but because it demonstrated how strategy can overcome superior numbers, how leadership can overcome fear, and how a seemingly hopeless situation can become a historic triumph. For France, however, the memory remained painful. Generations of chroniclers describe the battle as a national catastrophe. Thousands died. Much of the kingdom's military leadership disappeared in a single day. Families lost fathers, sons, brothers, and heirs. The psychological impact lasted for decades. Yet, history often works in unexpected ways. The humiliation of Agincourt eventually helped inspire a new determination inside France, a determination that would later help produce figures like Joan of Arc. In many ways, Agincourt was not the end of France's story. It was the beginning of a long struggle for recovery, and that may be why the battle remains so fascinating more than 600 years later. It was not simply a victory, it was a turning point, a moment when an exhausted army changed the course of a war, a moment when England reached the height of its medieval power, and a moment when France learned one of the hardest lessons in its history, that even the strongest kingdom can fall when confidence turns into complacency.